Everyone, in a minute, or morning or evening, depending on where you're joining us from online. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Silvia Mantilla, and I'm the Global Policy and Communications Manager at the World Federation for Animals. The World Federation for Animals represents over 75 animal protection organizations globally, working for the recognition of animal welfare as essential to sustainable development. We advocate for solutions that build on the interconnectedness of the health and well-being of humans, animals, and ecosystems. It's a pleasure to be here today for the official launch of our Animals for Climate Action tool and discuss the critical role of animal welfare in climate policy. Before we begin, I want to share a short video that will set the tone for today's press conference.
Did you know that animals are essential allies in mitigating climate change? Sea otters help restore kelp forests, which absorb carbon. Elephants spread seeds that regenerate forests. Whales encourage phytoplankton growth, capturing massive amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. From restoring ecosystems to enhancing carbon sequestration, animals do a great deal to help us protect the planet. Yet wildlife faces multiple threats, including being hunted, trafficked, and losing their habitats. We are pushing species to the brink of extinction. And the way we produce and consume food is further reducing space for wildlife to thrive. Our food systems are driving biodiversity loss through marine and land degradation. The Animals for Climate Action tool shows how governments can integrate animal welfare into their climate strategies. It offers practical solutions across 3 key areas: biodiversity protection and restoration, improving food production systems, shifting food consumption patterns. Each area includes policy actions, recommended measures, and real-world examples to inspire impactful change. Explore our tool and discover how you can take action. Because when animals thrive, our planet thrives.
So, as mentioned, the Animals for Climate Action tool is structured around 3 key intervention areas: biodiversity protection and restoration, intervention area 2, improving and shifting production systems, intervention area 3, improving food consumption patterns. For each intervention area, we've identified policy actions, recommended measures, and real-world life examples to inspire and guide policymakers. We provide practical solutions to help decision makers to be equipped to enhance natural carbon sequestration and protect animals as the vital climate allies that they are. We're building on the momentum that we gained at COP16, at the 16th Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, which took place in Colombia, where we've witnessed the historical acknowledgements of animals' contribution to climate action. With this tool, we aim to carry that recognition forward and provide governments with practical pathways to act. And today, we are joined by an exceptional panel of experts, who I get to call my colleagues. First, Ed Goodall, Head of Intergovernmental Engagement at Whale and Dolphin Conservation, who will speak on biodiversity protection and restoration. Clara Schubert, Farm Animals Policy Officer at 4PAWS, who will dive into Intervention Area 2, specifically on sustainable agricultural practices. Angel Flores, International External Affairs Manager at World Animal Protection, who will talk to us about Policy Action 2.3, Just Transitions. And Sebastian Osborne, Global Policy Manager at Mercy for Animals, who will talk to us on Intervention Area 3, Improving Food Consumption Patterns. And with that, let's dive in. Ed.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you to everybody for coming along today. So we know that if we need to keep to 1.5 degrees we're always talking about 2050, but we need to start thinking further into the future to 2100. So that means we need to start thinking beyond net zero and thinking about negative emission strategies to fix, store, and sequester additional carbon into our natural environments. We need to get that residual carbon out of the atmosphere. So beyond 2050 and net zero, we need to come up with these strategies that can help nature bring more carbon down and lock it away into nature. Earth's ecosystems already absorb about 50% of the carbon dioxide that we put up there in the atmosphere, but they could, if we protect and restore those habitats, fix, store, and sequester an additional 5 to 6 gigatons annually through effective conservation and protection measures. But that is not going to be enough to limit warming. So wild animals are a critical but overlooked factor when we're talking about the restoration of ecosystems and their climate linkages. So for example, forest elephants in the Congo Basin, when you take them out of the forest, that forest loses its carbon capture potential by up to 7%. They do this by spreading seeds around the forest of carbon-dense trees that can help to fix, store, and sequester a lot more carbon into those ecosystems. They trample down vegetation matter into the soil and help the soils lock it away. Whales in the ocean stimulate phytoplankton growth through the circulation of nutrients, and phytoplankton take down 25 to 30% of CO2, anthropogenic CO2 emissions. So the more we restore those processes, the more the ocean can draw down additional CO2. We also need to think about the role of trophic cascades, and when I say that, I mean restoring all aspects of animals within ecosystems. And trophic cascades, we're talking about their introduction or reintroduction of predators where they've gone locally extinct. So that's things like wolves in ecosystems. So the classic example of that in North America is the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Park, which allowed the predation on herbivore populations, which had got out of control with the absence of wolves, and then with less herbivores in the environment, that allows the vegetation to regrow, and then that's that vegetation that is fixing and storing, sequestering more carbon into those ecosystems. So there's a great paper that came out last year on this whole subject that showed that restoring just 9 different animal species groups in terrestrial and marine environments could bring additional drawdown of carbon of between 5 to 6 gigatons annually into these natural ecosystems. And that's something that's completely missing, really, from the climate discussion at the moment. So protecting animals and ecosystems is a low-risk, cost-effective strategy that brings a lot of other socioeconomic benefits, including human and animal well-being. So how do we start to integrate those things into policy? So with this new tool from WFA and our members, under the biodiversity protection intervention area, the first thing is wildlife protection. So we need to look after those individual animals and populations of individual animals within their ecosystem. So we need to crack down on things like wildlife crime through strict national and international cooperation on animal trafficking. We need much better enforcement of those things. We need to end wildlife trade, because we need to leave these animals where they are in ecosystems so they can undertake these important ecosystem functioning roles. If we leave animals where they are, and if we're not trading them all around the world, that also limits things like zoonotic spillover, which can reduce the risk of pandemics, as we've seen in recent years. Second thing is habitat protection. That includes things like expansion of protected areas on land and sea with strict limitations on what happens within those areas. And predominantly, we need to be seeing completely non-extractive uses within those kind of protected areas. We need to ensure those protected areas are functional for these species, that they're protecting species throughout their life cycles. It's particularly important for things like whales and dolphins that are migratory, so we need to protect them throughout their entire ranges. The third area is ecosystem recovery. So we need to reduce the pressures on these ecosystems so they can build up their ecological integrity and allow for all of the different animals that should be in those ecosystems to thrive and allow those ecosystems to function optimally. And that can include the reintroduction of top predators and things like rewilding where those animals have gone locally extinct. So a great example of this recently, just before COP16 in Cali, was in the Azores. So the Azores announced a new marine protected area in the North Atlantic. It's actually the biggest MPA in the North Atlantic, over 300,000 kilometers squared, which is bigger than the whole of the UK. Half of that protected area is explicitly, completely protected. No human activity can take place in that area, and the other half is highly protected, which means that only very specific and limited human activity, like specific fishing techniques, can take place in that area. So when we're thinking about this whole area, we need to give as much space back to nature as possible. And things like our human food system are taking up a lot of space on our planet from the way that we produce food, and limiting the role of nature in providing these key ecosystem services, which includes climate mitigation and adaptation. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Clara Schubert from Ford Ports, who's going to talk a little bit more about this.
Perfect. Thank you, Ed, and thank you, everyone, for joining today. I'm glad to present to you the policy actions within sustainable agricultural practices, and I'll provide a bit of an overview as to the harms and negative effects of our food systems as they are now and what are the solutions to this. Our current food systems, and in particular industrial animal agriculture, are major drivers of both climate change and biodiversity loss. Globally, over 40% of habitable land is used for agriculture, and about 77% of this is used for animal farming, so that includes grazing and feed crop production. Deforestation, driven by the large-scale feed production in order to sustain global animal numbers, leads not only to habitat loss, but also releases substantial amounts of carbon. Additionally, the heavy reliance on synthetic fertilizers for feed crop cultivation also depletes soil health, leads to erosion, and reduces the soil's ability to sequester carbon. And then we also have the excess nitrogen that is released by these synthetic fertilizers, and this, together with high volumes of manure, also leads to nutrient pollution and evaporates into nitrous oxide, which is a potent greenhouse gas and an air pollutant. And linking to that, we know that animal agriculture accounts for a sixth of all anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, and half of these emissions are methane. And in order to reduce these emissions, right now the focus has been on technical fixes, such as feed additives to inhibit the cows' and ruminants' production of methane. And these technical solutions run the risk of further intensifying systems and not addressing the other environmental impacts of these systems. So in order to address these challenges, we must transition away from environmentally harmful farming practices and towards truly sustainable solutions. And the Animals for Climate Action tool lists a couple of these solutions that can be promoted in order to address all of these different negative externalities. Because when kept appropriately and when able to live out their natural behaviors, animals play a valuable role in their ecosystems. For instance, good grazing practices with appropriate stocking densities allow for a balanced distribution of manure, and this improves soil fertility and crop growth and reduces the reliance on external inputs. We also need to diversify production systems, which unlocks numerous co-benefits. Integrated approaches such as agroforestry uses trees in crop and pasture land, which contributes to offsetting emissions through improved carbon sequestration. The presence of trees also creates microclimates, which improves animal welfare and also improves the system's climate resilience. The Animals for Climate Action tool shows numerous examples of this. One of them is from the Sahelian region, which showcases pastoralism, which is a traditional practice in which animals, mainly cattle, goats, but also donkeys and horses, are kept on extensive grasslands and moved seasonally in herds. It examines the spatial distribution of organic matter and how the movement of herds plays an essential role in really enhancing and safeguarding the healthy functioning of the rangeland ecosystem. The manure distribution allows for a balanced cycling of important nutrients, including carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, and this fosters the growth of grasses and shrubs and increases the capacity of the area to sequester carbon. It also helps protect against the risk of wildfires through the trampling of grasses, and this makes such systems also more resilient to climate impacts. There are some challenges that need to be addressed also regionally. For instance, pastoralist access to rangelands has been increasingly fragmented due to the expansion of crop cultivation, also linked to the need for feed production. So this case study shows that how, in response to this, the economic community of West African states implemented a policy in 2023 to really safeguard the access of pastoralists to these vital grazing areas. And this case shows that how safeguarding the practice of extensive grazing and the movement of herds not only strengthens local communities and protects cultural heritage, but also serves as a climate mitigation and climate adaptation measure. So when we look at the state of land degradation and what we know about greenhouse gas emissions and how animal agriculture contributes to this, we know that our current farming systems do not work. If we transition to holistic, circular, more diversified farming models, this can have positive effects on soil health, it can strengthen ecosystems, and it can adapt to climate impacts. But in order for us to be able to transition to these more holistic animal farming practices, we must support farmers in transitioning away from the harmful practices that might be used today. And to talk more about this, our colleague Angel will present the next policy action.
Thank you for that, Clara. So building on what Clara has discussed, allow me to take you through the next policy action under transforming food production systems, which is around just transitions. As Clara said, she talked about the science, and it is very clear that if we are to meet the Paris Agreement goals, as well as sustainable development goals, then our food systems must transition. In shifting towards more sustainable food systems, we must ensure that the transition is equitable. I cannot overemphasize that this shift is not just about protecting the environment, and it's also about protecting farmers and workers who form the backbone of our food production. As we move away from industrial animal agriculture, it is essential that no one gets left behind. Farmers and workers are key stakeholders in this transformation, and they need adequate support to access new opportunities that can improve their livelihoods while contributing to a food system that is better for animals and nature, for people and the climate. So allow me to take you through the key measures under this particular intervention area. We see 3 measures underneath this. The first one is around financial assistance and incentives. We must redirect subsidies to encourage producers to transition to agroecological, circular practices, and this includes removing the barriers associated with the costs of changing production methods and diversifying crops. Additionally, we should compensate producers for retiring and rewilding land previously used for industrial meat and dairy production. Government funding programs can support farmers with long-term funding and technical assistance to convert land used for pasture and feed crops into native habitats that store carbon and restore nature. The second measure is around technical support for producers. Meat, dairy, and seafood producers need guidance to shift towards plant-rich, plant-based, and agroecological practices. Support should be made available at all levels, company, investor, and individual, to ensure everyone from smallholders to large producers can participate in this transformation. This can also mean scaling already proven practices that already exist. The third one is around enhancing market opportunities. It is crucial to open up new markets for agroecologically produced food through certification, labeling, and procurement policies. These initiatives are particularly important for supporting marginalized producers, including women, indigenous people, and people of color. In terms of examples of where we are seeing some steps towards a just transition, we have some examples here from Denmark and Netherlands. I just want to say and do recognize that these are very early examples, and we are yet to see how impactful these initiatives will be. And we can learn from that experience, whether those are lessons to be learned or best practices that we can take from them. So for example, in Denmark, where 70% of agricultural land is used to grow animal feed, the government has allocated about $90 million to incentivize farmers to grow plant-based proteins for human consumption. This initiative is part of Denmark's broader strategy to promote sustainable food production, reduce environmental impact, and meet climate targets. The other one is a recently approved funding by the European Commission of around 700 million euros. It's a Dutch scheme to compensate farmers who voluntarily close livestock farming sites in sensitive areas. This initiative, set to run until 2029, aims to reduce nitrogen emissions and improve environmental quality while promoting sustainable farming practices. We urge governments to include stronger, more comprehensive measures in their nationally determined contributions using this Animals for Climate tool. By doing so, we can ensure a fair and just transition for all, one that not only uplifts farmers and workers, but also aligns with our climate and biodiversity goals. Now, while changing production is crucial, we must also consider the other side of the equation, which is consumption. So I now would like to hand over to Sebastian, my colleague here, who will discuss how our consumption patterns need to evolve to meet our sustainability goals. Thank you.
Thank you, and hello. I'm Sebastian Osborne with Mercy for Animals, and I'm excited to share the potential for Animals for Climate Action to support policies that enable healthier and more sustainable food consumption. To achieve climate and other goals, it is crucial to address the consumption stage of our food system. That's diets and food loss and waste, because what we consume determines what and how much we produce, and different foods differ vastly in their contribution to health as well as in their impact on animals, ecosystems, land, water, and our climate, even factoring in the potential for improvements in production practices. For terrestrial systems, for example, the main impact of food systems on biodiversity occurs through land conversion, a large portion of which is to grow crops for animal feed. Producing a kilo of protein from poultry, for example, requires on average close to 15 times as much land as is needed to produce a kilo of protein from peas. Such differences add up. As the IPCC noted in their special report on climate change and land, if a US dietary pattern was adopted globally, this would require nearly double the world's habitable land area. We see similar disparities in other impacts that affect wildlife, such as GHG emissions or eutrophication. Fishing, for example, is the primary driver of marine biodiversity loss, and excessive consumption in some parts of the world or fishing for feed for carnivorous aquaculture has resulted in harms to ecosystems as well as the food security of vulnerable populations. Food is important for a variety of reasons, in addition to climate and nature, in particular nutrition, but the core shifts we need to reduce impacts on the environment, principally reducing overconsumption of animal products, especially in high-income countries, and increasing the amount of fruits, vegetables, and legumes available globally, effectively supports benefits to nature, climate, and nutrition. A shift towards plant-based diets could free up billions of hectares for nature-positive land use, such as rewilding, restoration, and natural carbon sequestration. In oceans, reducing the extraction of vast numbers of fish and other marine species for consumption and feed would allow their populations to recover and increase their contributions to the natural carbon cycle. Animals for Climate Action contains concrete measures that countries can include in their national plans to support healthier and more sustainable food consumption. For example, the measure on developing enabling food environments outlines policy options such as labeling schemes and public procurement policies that can make it easier for consumers to make healthy and sustainable choices. Similarly, the measure on introducing school and institutional programs outlines the potential for programs in schools, hospitals, and other government institutions to serve sustainable plant-based meals in line with planetary boundaries. Such measures reflect proven successes. For example, in cities like Salvador, Bergamo, and Copenhagen, policies promoting plant-based meals in public institutions have resulted in reduced carbon footprints that support climate goals. We hope Animals for Climate Action will support countries in including policies to promote healthy and sustainable food consumption, improving the well-being of humans and animals, and providing space for nature-positive actions. Thank you.
Thank you. We can answer questions on the way out. Thank you very much, everyone.